Hi, my name is Sebastian. Today I have a guest with me, and we're going to be talking about digital literacy and digital citizenship. My guest here is Greg Keller, and he's a teacher. How long have you been a teacher?
I've been in the district for 12 years.
As a teacher, how many kind of positions have you had?
So I've been fortunate to have quite a bit of diversity in my career. I've been a classroom teacher for about 8 years, and then a TOSA for 4. So I've been at the high school level teaching a variety of subjects from language arts to AVID to personal career exploration. Now I run the makerspace at the high school, and I also will be teaching construction with you next year. In addition to that, I spent a couple years at the middle school level teaching 6th grade language arts, social studies, and reading. And then I also had a 2.5 year experience in the district office being the digital curriculum director. So I would go out to different schools rolling out technology for our digital curriculum at the secondary level.
Okay, so today I'm going to have quite a few questions about digital literacy and citizenship, because I think it's a very important thing for kids to understand that when they're online, it's actually a pretty big thing. So I'm just going to go through some of the questions I have.
Okay.
Right. So how would you rate yourself as a digital citizen?
Well, I mean, I feel like I participate in a lot of different online platforms, such as Facebook. I have a Google account. I have an Instagram, and of course, just in general, I use the internet. So having multiple accounts on multiple platforms for anything from purchasing from Amazon to Netflix. So I would say I'm definitely plugged into the digital world. In terms of how I handle that, I definitely approach it with the idea that I'm not anonymous online. So what I do, I know is being tracked. I know there's really no such thing as privacy online. So I also know that in participating in a lot of these platforms, I'm actually giving companies information about me freely, which they use to in turn sell to large companies that do marketing.
Okay, yeah, very good. So not thinking about students at this point, so do you think social media is generally a positive or negative thing in society, and why?
I don't know if I can really say one way or the other. I think it can certainly be both, and it's not one or the other, I guess I would say. And for that reason, I think it just depends on who's using it, what they're using it for, but also just getting back to the actual user's emotional state. I think that plays a part. I think we've certainly seen some nefarious activities from different companies and different governments around how they're using social media to influence people. But that's kind of it's like the marketer's dream, right? You have a plug-in directly to someone's house. They're on it quite a bit. You can influence what they're seeing. You're gathering data about what their preferences are, so you can really target that marketing directly at them. So I would say that, as a consumer, it's actually nice in some ways because I'm getting information about things that I might want. At the same time, I might be getting targeted for certain things that I don't want to get targeted for. And you and I talk a lot about like the different emails we get from companies that we're associated with or organizations, and how those messages get really tailor-made to influence us, and how sometimes those go into the spam folder.
Yeah, very good. So, every district, well, I would think every district, I might be wrong about this, but most districts, let me just say most districts have an acceptable use policy for students. Are you aware of our acceptable use policy?
I am aware of our acceptable use policy. In fact, I helped craft the acceptable use policy for this district when I was in my old position. And I did that with our director of technology. We looked at several different acceptable use policies from a variety of districts around the country and state, and tried to come up with one that was, you don't want to try and reinvent the wheel necessarily, because then it just gets, you don't really have to be original. There's a lot of good stuff out there. But I think the main goal was to approach it with the idea that when kids are at school and they're on a school-based computer platform, whatever, however they're plugged in, their information is not private, and there should be no expectation of privacy when a student is using a school-based computer.
Okay. So how long has our current policy been in place? Do you know?
You know, I don't know if it's been updated since I was, I've left that position,
Mhm.
so I don't know if it's changed. I would say that if it hasn't changed or just been tweaked, it's probably been about 5 to 6 years.
Okay. Is there anything you'd change now? Like just off the top of your head?
Honestly, I don't remember that much about it at this
Okay.
point. I think
Uh-huh.
that it was just a way for the district to cover itself from getting itself into kind of trouble with saying, we found this, the student was doing this, and then parent
Mhm.
being able to say, well, that's not fair. It is fair because the kid should be doing their schoolwork and not doing other things.
Mhm.
I mean, the school rules don't end when they get on a computer and they're in the land of, and they're in the digital environment. Everything still applies. So bullying, all those types of things. In fact, I think it directly addressed those issues so that students understood that if they, and the other problem is, I don't think students really look at it, right? It's like every other adult who just clicks accept on, their user agreement
Mhm.
when they sign up for an account. So, I mean, are kids really understanding? Was it written in kid-friendly language? No. I think that's the thing that I would probably try to change, is that I would try and make it more kid-friendly so that the students understood what they were getting into. And I think that would be a great teaching point for them across all platforms.
Mhm.
Because I think so many of us, we just click accept, and we don't realize, I, as a person, realize that I'm giving away everything that I'm putting on that platform. But I don't think most people think about it, and then they want to complain about it later if something happens.
Mhm. Yeah, that's make a good point there. Okay. So, technology, at least in the US, is becoming very important for education. I would say it is. A lot of school districts are pushing technology and technology classes and things like that. Do you think it should be the school district's responsibility to ensure that students had access to technology even outside of school?
Well, I think what it comes down to more and more now is, do students have access to the internet?
Mm-hmm.
And because so many of our platforms that we use are online, and that, kids generally have access to a phone, but that doesn't mean that they have access to an unlimited plan. And a lot of platforms don't necessarily play well with phones. And, you certainly don't want a kid doing a lot of work on a phone because it's not a device that's really conducive to that.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's kind of a tough call because I don't think we've reached a tipping point yet where it's become the main way in which education is brought to students. At the same time, it's becoming more and more so, that's for sure. So I think as we get to that point, I think the government has to consider, if they're gonna have a lot of different online platforms, is that something that all citizens should have access to as an equity piece? I also don't think that means that I think there's ways of doing that where they have access to educational components, but not necessarily the entire internet, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So,
kind of like a lockdown version of the technology.
right, which I think is something that would be an interesting way of looking at, keeping ads and distractions outside of the online environment, and kind of almost like the intranet rather than internet, and
Mhm.
have it be an online platform that exists for education.
It's interesting. So like kind of an intranet for the education system. So like
Right.
a school district or state level or even federal level would have like a big platform for students.
Right. So you can have a little bit more streamlining of curriculum and delivery and make it easier. Now, is that a good idea? Maybe not, but it gets us closer to having more equity in terms of what students are consuming. The one concern I would have is that then you get into this commercialization of education where large publishers are the ones that have the huge advantage of getting those contracts. And then I think we're into another, we're back to the textbook, but it's now a digital form, and it's the same old where they can overpromise and underdeliver, which I've seen time and time again, and then really control the way education is run. I love a more open source type education environment where teachers are able to develop curriculum and create lessons and really make it more hopefully student-driven based on the teacher's practice. But
Mhm.
yeah, I think there's something to be said for that, because I dealt with a lot of textbook adoptions, digital ones, when I was in my old position, and I'm really disheartened by the amount of money that's spent for products that don't meet the bar, but they say they will, and then they just pull this game of switching out your representative and just taking you in circles about what their platform should do but will never do.
Okay, I see. So my next question here is, I'm going to read it word for word because it's a little bit complex here. What is the impact, in your opinion, of the change of digital forms of communication, and what can you teach students to be more successful with the change? By change, I mean the change has already pretty much happened, I think, where instead of face-to-face, it's more on social media or through text and things like that. So I guess my question is, what is our responsibility? What should we be doing to prepare students to deal with that new form of communication? Or is that not even our responsibility?
Well, I think it's partially our responsibility. I mean, society has structures and there's a cultural piece to this. I think that, as a father of two teenagers, I was just thinking about this the other day. I don't hear my daughters that often when they're kind of in they're in their room. I used to think about, like, my brother might have the stereo up too loud when I was, a kid or whatever. But nowadays, it's all headphones and screens when they're kind of, immersed in that environment. I think one thing we need to do is kind of set some limits on screen time, and I think that's becoming an issue because as we have one-to-one or classroom-based sets of computers, we're getting a lot more screen time for these kids. And honestly, the way things are set up in most districts, teachers don't know what kids are looking at on the screen most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And those systems are really expensive, and they take a huge toll on the infrastructure in terms of data to run. And you know that from being in a lab.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to monitor all computers.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a time and a place for the digital piece, and then there's a time and a place for that screen to be down. So in terms of teaching it as a structured piece of your curriculum, I think that really depends on the style of the teacher. But at the same time, it's certainly something to consider as we get more and more devices in everyone's classroom. How do we tackle that? And then at home, I think about all the kids that probably just go home and just plug in from the time that they get home to probably when they go to bed. It's scary because I grew up running around every day after school playing, and just interacting with other people was how you had to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, you can interact without actually being in the same physical place. So I don't know. It's open. What was the last part of that question?
The last part was, what can we teach students to be more successful with that change?
Well, I think we have to accept the fact that society is changing. And in doing that, we have to kind of let go of where we've been, because the genie's out of the bottle at this point. You're not going to be able to change, back to a pre-internet time period or a pre-cell phone time period.
Mm-hmm.
So I think looking at the impact of what these devices are having on our kids, and you've talked to me about a few studies that show that there's a lot of anxiety around this for kids, and the types of how it's affecting the brain, I think, is really important. A dopamine hit they get every time they get a like on something, or they get another follower, or they interact and they get a response from someone. That's a really scary thing. And some people liken it to having a liquor cabinet in your house, but you don't have a key to lock it. So you're just letting the kid have access to that.
Interesting.
And that you've essentially just turned over this mind-altering piece of technology that's really changing their brain chemically.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens when you, as a parent or as a teacher, you clamp down on that and you take away the phone or something, there's a withdrawal.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that scientifically we need to study and get a better handle on.
Okay. So then back to what you think our responsibility as educators is. Do you think that things like digital citizenship should be explicitly taught and practiced at the school level.
Yes.
Yes.
Because if we're going to expect students to interact on platforms, they need to understand what is acceptable when doing that. So just like having an acceptable use policy, I was also part of developing a K through 12 online digital citizenship lesson plan for the whole district. And that involved actually creating a whole curriculum that at the elementary level was taught by the school's computer lab staff.
Okay.
And then at the middle school level, I don't really know where, like, I think we tried to just kind of layer that into different classrooms. It wasn't like said it was gonna be done in this specific room, and that was, you know, teachers at the secondary level like a little more freedom. And they tend to not follow directions as well as elementary teachers.
Okay.
That's a reality for you people out there in the higher education system. So I think that for the most part, there needs to be something that's laying out, you know, at the very early stages, like things like usernames and passwords and the importance of logging off and not having it save your information to the computer. And then as students get a little older, talking about like what they put online really never goes away. So like if you post something somewhere, there's always a record of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting because I've been involved in a couple different investigations in the district for like finding kids that have done things. And they're always amazed they can be found. But it's like not that difficult, right? Because they were on a device. We know the set of devices they were on. We know the time period in which it generally happened. So it's really just kind of tracking back to whoever was in that classroom, looking at different Google Docs. I mean, I busted a whole ring of cheaters on a final, and it was like 50 kids who were sharing a Google Doc.
I remember that.
And
AP kids.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and they thought they were, you know, they had it all figured out.
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, there we were looking at it, and it was so easy. And it is actually an outside Gmail that we tracked it back to. So it wasn't even in the school district, but it was easy to see who that document had been shared with. Once we got the kid in, he opened it, we saw all the names, had a nice screenshot of that. Then you just pull them all in, and yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, how can kids protect themselves when online? What advice would you give to? Let's think of it this way. What advice would you give to a parent talking to their kid?
Well, first of all, become educated yourself, right? So, and accept the fact that whatever you're doing online is readily at the fingertips of whoever owns that platform and whoever they're selling that information to.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just accepting the fact that there is no privacy. You know, there's this interesting thing right now in society where there's this debate over, like, you know, who was involved in hacking the elections. It's like, it's not that difficult for intelligence folks to figure that out once they have the information.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not really a debate. It's either you believe it or you don't. And I think the same thing is said for Facebook. Like, you look at this whole thing that became, like, you know, international news around Facebook and the users and Cambridge Analytica and who's using the data. Well, they paid for it, you know, and they wanted access to it. So I think that if you're honest about it yourself as a parent and as a teacher, then you understand that everything that's out there is available for consumption by whoever has control over that data.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where you start. You start by being completely upfront and saying anything you do online can be seen. So it's kind of like, you know, never write anything you don't want to be read, never say anything you don't want to be heard. Okay, hopefully we're not at the point where never think anything you don't want to be, like, known, right?
Hopefully we don't get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, like, and never record anything or take a picture of anything you don't want to be seen, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's also a big part of it. As a parent, I don't let my kids, or I tell them I don't want them to be on social media platforms, because the damage can be ridiculously fast, right? Like, someone takes a selfie, sends it to someone, next thing you know, that thing is on 50 other computers, right?
Mhm.
And it just growing. So you got to be really careful about what you're doing and educate your kids that anything you do can be shared with other people. If you share anything with anyone online, it can be shared with someone else.
Mhm. Okay, very good. The last question I have for you is, more of like a legal question. I don't know if you know the term, but do you know what COPA is?
I do not.
Do not. So COPA is a form of protection for students. Like we cannot use their images for certain things. Do you know of any other things that we abide by here at the district for putting out pictures and information about students?
I know that on our student information system, parents, when they register their students for school each year, have to check a box whether or not their picture can be shared. So there's like a media block that you can check. So it's an opt-in if you don't do anything, right? And that's kind of the way a lot of things work. And there again is an education piece where if you want something to not happen, then you have to check the box. Whereas like if you don't check the box or you're not paying attention, you know, that student's picture can be used.
Do you think something like this should be marketed more? Like, should parents be made more aware of it somehow? Or is it their responsibility to just find it?
Well, I think as a citizen, it's always your responsibility to know what you're getting yourself into. Now, as a government employee, I also think that it's important for parents to be aware of what they're getting into, especially with a large computer system that collects information about their insurance, their address, their phone number, their siblings, their legal status in some cases. There's a lot of information that gets put into our system. As far as I know, none of that information gets shared. But at the same time, it's there, so it's available for someone.
Okay. I just have one more question for you. So since you've worked with technology quite a bit, and you've actually been a leader in developing technology for kids, how do you think our technology is going to change within the next five years, or even 10 years? 10 years in the future, what do you think will happen?
Well, one thing I definitely think will happen is you'll see a lot more virtual reality type training available for a variety of fields. And that experiential learning piece will become more readily available, because you and I have gone to conferences and seen this, like especially in the career technical education aspects, actual like training programs where you're immersed in a virtual reality environment, right? And you're selecting different tools, and you're working on different types of like machines. So I think that's something that is only going to get more embedded. I also think that you can really have a better experience teaching certain subjects if the kid can actually like virtually be in the area that you're studying, right? So if it's social studies and they're studying about different types of geography, how cool would it be to like slip on the old headset and you're like in the rainforest, right? You're getting this immersed experience where you're no longer just reading about it and using the descriptive words of the author, but you're actually, you know, not necessarily getting all the tactile, but you're getting that different experience. And I think that's something that has a lot of potential.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming today and sharing with us your input on all these things. And everyone, thank you for watching.